So, how does Ernest Becker clarify Buddhism? The way he clarifies it, or in some ways perhaps even modifies it, is by pointing to the most problematic aspects of human desire, as well as the times when desire is necessary or inescapable. In other words, whereas Buddhism emphasizes the suffering that comes from impermanence and our attachment to desire in general, or at least many different forms of desire, Becker emphasizes that it is our unconscious desire to avoid the terror of death that is at the root of most human suffering and delusion, because it basically blankets most other desires with the weight of the ego, or at least with the need to escape our existential anxiety. And this makes all desires more problematic. So, for example, humans may, say, overeat to escape from their existential anxiety, whereas the attachment that animals in the wild have to food is much more related to direct survival. Or if a creature, say, has sex or has a partner, and then it's deprived sex or deprived that partner, there may be some frustration, some suffering or anguish. But as compared to other animals, this frustration is made much worse in humans by the various trappings of the ego and its cultural basis. So, as you may already know, terror management theory has proven that our sense of self, our self esteem, is formed by living up to or exceeding the standards of whichever culture you subscribe to. And that culture, by continuing on after your individual death, makes it so that your contributions to it make you feel like some part of you will survive your death. And so, if others don't want to be your partners or have sex with you, for example, it may make you feel like a loser by the standards of your culture. It's not just the actual animal pleasure or satisfaction of the interaction that you are craving, but also what it implies socially or culturally about you. And the same can be said about many other forms of craving and aversion. What often makes them most problematic is the culturally based self esteem or ego that is attached to the experience, which is ultimately rooted in our desire to avoid the terror of death. A soldier, say, may sacrifice not only sensory pleasures, but even his own life in order to defend the ideals of the immortal patriotic culture he has subscribed to, thereby showing that his desire for immortality has more weight than all other desires. This desire for immortality is also seen in Buddhism itself, in the form of an unfounded belief in reincarnation, where some soul or essence of self remains after death and is transferred to other beings. This in turn demonstrates that the desire for immortality is to some extent impossible to escape. Even atheist Buddhists like Stephen Batchelor end up substituting the belief in reincarnation for a stronger allegiance to the immortal values of secular culture, like art or a faith in technological progress. This inescapable desire for immortality does not bring into question some of the other basic principles of Buddhism, which seem quite sound, but it does make it clear that there are limits to our capacity for desirelessness. What is the best illusion under which to live, or what is the most legitimate foolishness? These were questions that Ernest Becker posed in order to highlight the need to deal with our inevitable descent into illusion. A Buddhist answer might be that the most legitimate foolishness is that which is the least difficult or frustrating to obtain, and that which also causes the least suffering. Primitive peoples like the Kalahari Bushmen are often praised by the remarkable lack of attachment they have to material and worldly things. But what has to be understood is that that lack of attachment is achieved through a gigantic ego expansion. As Becker points out in Escape from Evil, the primitive spiritual worldview gave primitives the status of cosmic creators, of small gods in nature. And as long as this spirituality kept some separation from the material world, most worldly desires became much less problematic. The primitives' illusions of cosmic significance were the most legitimate foolishness the humankind has ever come up with. It was mostly in the realm of imagination, so it was easy to obtain, and it did not destroy the biosphere the way we are currently doing. So it caused the least suffering as well. It also gave humans the cosmic heroism and immortality that they truly crave. Buddhism arose in an era where this most legitimate foolishness was no longer in place, and so had to fall back on the doctrine of reincarnation in order to encourage some level of detachment from worldly desires, or even just to survive as a worldview that would be financially supported by an immortality craving society, especially those who had wealth within that society. It is hard to judge how comparatively legitimate the illusion of reincarnation is as compared to other necessary illusions in our society. But in its basic doctrine, Buddhism does nevertheless have it right that we need a reduced attachment to worldly desires, especially those that are destructive and cause suffering, and certainly those that have a negative satisfaction to dissatisfaction ratio. Becker, in my opinion, reinforced the need for detachment by showing the extent to which human culture is a death denying illusion, and thus, from a rational perspective, not worth our attachment. As I said in a previous video, Becker praised the stillness of meditation and the detachment from cultural desires, what he called a Buddhistic sentiment, the achievement of a certain kind of maturity and transcendence. Now, can this stillness and detachment ever void the need for illusion, the need for finding the most legitimate foolishness? Of course not. Do not expect from life more than what it can provide. This too is a Buddhist teaching.